This is page 65 of your math journal. Okay, this one's going to have a little bit different title than your book, than your book does for the lesson. Okay, I'm trying to fit a couple of things in here, so we're just going to make it short by calling it decimals, percents, and fractions. Decimals, percents, and fractions. Okay, we've already gone over all of these, but there's one thing I wanted to make sure was very clear. Okay, I want to look at going from fractions to percents. From fractions to decimals to percents. How's that? We worked with some, we learned how to go from fractions to percents. We also learned to go from decimals to percents. Well, fractions to percents works really nice when you can turn something easily into 100. However, sometimes they're not so nice. So one way that always works, okay, this method always works. As long as you do your math right, I should say. Okay, this method always works. Turn the fraction into a decimal. And then convert it to a percent. So let's do a couple of examples. Let's say you have 6 eighths. Okay, I can't easily go from 8 to 100, but I can easily take 6 and divide it by 8. So that's what I'm going to do. 6 divided by 8. We already know how to turn fractions into decimals. Divide the top by the bottom. 8 goes into 6 0 times, so minus 0 leaves me with 6. Annex a decimal and a 0. 8 goes into 67 times, minus 56 gives me 4. Annex another 0, leaves me with 40. 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40. Okay, I turned that into a decimal. So now I've got 0.75. Well, once I've gotten it into its decimal form, we know that going to its percent form is super easy. So 0.75, I move my decimal 2 times to the right, and I am left with 75%. This was the hardest part, but I promise turning it into the decimal is generally easier as long as it's not something that easily changes into 100. Alright, with that, we're now going to go on to the part of the lesson that I want to focus on today. Okay, we're going to talk about percents greater than 100. What would it mean to be greater than 100%? Well, up here, let's put a little star because we got some space. And I want you to write 100% means 1 whole unit. It means 100 over 100. So 1 complete unit. So what would a percent greater than 100% mean? If it's greater than 100%, then that means more than one complete unit. Okay, it might be a test. When you get 105% on a test, you got the entire test correct and 5% more right with the extra credit questions. When you get 100 and when you get 200% of your reading goal, you got your goal a second time. You completed it 2 full units, which was your goal 2 times. So percents greater than 100% means more than 1 unit. So let's look at some examples. Let's say you have 1.5 sandwiches. What percent of a sandwich do you have? If you have 1.5 sandwiches, I'm just going to turn this into its decimal form. I already know that 1/2 is the same as 0.5. So if I turn this into 1.5 sandwiches, and I want to know what percent that is, my unit is a sandwich. So I have 100% of a sandwich and 50% more. How do I know that? If I move the decimal 1 2 times and put on a percent, then I have 150% of a sandwich, because I have 1 whole sandwich and 50% more. What if we have something like what if you have 230% of your reading goal? Let's write that as a fraction. If I want to write that as a fraction, let's first go from percent to decimal form. So I'm just going to move this back 2 places, and that's where I'm going to end up with 2.3. In other words, you have gotten your reading goal 2 whole times and 30% more, correct? Now if I want that as a fraction, then you have gotten, what's my place value here? Tenths. So I have 2 full units and 3 tenths. So you've gotten your goal 2 whole times, and now you're 3/10 of the way through another one of your goal. So that would be from percent back to fraction. Here we went from a fraction to a percent. Now sometimes you might just have a decimal, and you can easily go from decimal to percent as well. We're also going to talk about what percents less than 1 look like. Okay, so percent less than 1 okay, what that means, or not less than 1, sorry, less than 1 means what we usually are working with, 90%, 80%. I'm sorry, I should say less than 1%. Let's change that into a percent sign. Less than 1%. That means less than 1/100th. In parentheses, I want you to write really small. Okay, so let's say you have something like this. 0.003. that would be the thousandths place. So if I want to turn this into a percentage, I'm just going to move the decimal like I've practiced before. So my decimal would move 1, 2 to the right. And what do I have? 0.3%. So if someone promises you that you can earn 0.3% interest on your savings account, you're really not making very much money. You are not even going to get 1/100th of what you put in there. So a lot of times they'll make it sound better by writing it this way with a percent sign, but you can see that's a really small number. We can even get smaller than that. What if we have 0.00062? This is, once again, even smaller than this number. But if I want to turn it into a percent, I move the decimal 1, 2 places. So this would be 0.062%. We're talking about a small, tiny portion of even 1%. This is a super tiny percentage. Okay, sometimes we might need to go from fractions to percent, or percent to fraction. Actually, let's go percent to fraction. Let's say we have 0.23%, and I want to know what that is as a fraction. So to go from there to a fraction, I first need to turn it back into a decimal. So move it back to a decimal, we put it right there. So this would be equal to 0.00, see where I'm getting that from? 0023. Now I want that as a fraction. Alright, so I need to look at my place value. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. That means this is going to be written over 10,000. So I'm going to take 23. I don't need all these zeros with it. Over 10,000. Now will that reduce? No. That would be what 0.23% is. 23 out of 10,000. So when you're looking at percents less than 1%, realize that they're super small numbers. Now, sometimes it can really matter and sometimes it can't. In science, sometimes we have to get down to such small percentages.